I just want to briefly intro this idea of smart mobility infrastructure. So I did some research and I was like, what is this smart mobility piece? Like, if you haven't heard of it, I just want to lay a bit of the context. When we think about smart mobility, it covers a massive breadth of topics. And we're not going to get into that level of detail today, but if you think about, bike shares, e-bikes, e-scooters, multimodal mobility or transportation, this idea of micro-mobility, all those things I mentioned. I learned a new one the other day called mini-mobility, this idea of the intersection between e-mobility and a small vehicle, whether it be small motorcycles or small electric vehicles, drone technology, smart parking, transit, ride sharing, on-demand mobility, data management, intelligent traffic systems, car sharing, EVs. That's that whole sort of ecosystem of smart mobility. Ladies first, Maureen, maybe I can have you talk about, tell us about a key project or service that HSR is leading around smart mobility and how you see transit's role as a key player in the smart mobility space.
It really is a great opportunity for our community to recenter how it uses its resources, how we build out, where we build out, how we use land, what our density is, how do we motivate people from getting out of their cars and getting into public transport. The speaker before us talked about housing affordability, which for our Gen Zs and our Gen Xers and the millennials, they don't think that home ownership is going to be attainable for them. So if they don't think that they're going to ever be able to buy the suburban 2-story house with a 2-car garage, what happens to those assets? Where do those young people go, and how do they get around? And obviously, we would like transit to be the answer. So we think that we're a core service. Certainly, the pandemic proved to us unequivocally that we transport essential workers, and we are a service that is absolutely vital to the health and welfare and economic sustainability of this community. So I'll step off my soapbox and talk for a moment about one of the innovation projects that HSR has undertaken in the last 18 months. We rolled out on-demand transit in Waterdown, Ontario. So historically, Waterdown has had a very active business community that wanted transit as a mechanism for employees to get to work. And the challenge that we had was on the fixed route model of service, the ridership numbers really just kind of weren't there to make it sustainable or make it a robust long-term option. So we implemented on demand, and that's a form of microtransit. We don't view it as a replacement of our conventional service. We view it as an augmentation, almost a feeder system. And the way on-demand transit works is you can log into your phone and use an app, or you can call into our call center, but you basically can book the trip morning of travel. You can book it up to 3 days in advance, and it's a dynamic routing system. So as the driver is operating the vehicle, the route is flexing based on desired passenger pickup. So it's been in operation for just over a year. We have an 18-month pilot slated so that we can go back to the council with a full and robust series of recommendations. One of the benefits of a pilot, of course, is you can react and respond. What we did learn was that the full on-demand model in Waterdown wasn't robust enough to handle the traffic between the Aldershot GO station and connecting up into Waterdown. So we've implemented a hybrid solution just within the past week. So that's an example of how we can innovate and be flexible using technology as a service, as opposed to sort of the more traditional pole in the ground bus stop fixed route, which is very hard to be responsive on because we plan months and years in advance for our fixed route service. So on-demand is quite popular all over North America. It's not new worldwide. And like I said, it's new to us. And we already see the geographic areas where we would look to expand that service. So on-demand really is an innovative solution to kind of bridge that gap between traditional levels of service and ideal levels of service. So we're pleased with how it's going, and we look forward to expansion of it in the near future.
We need to learn as a community and as a city, and this idea of piloting something, learning from it, and then using that to enhance how we deliver services going forward as it relates to this sort of smart mobility space is awesome.
Our technology, I'll use an example with the city of Hamilton. So we installed our IoT devices, which basically a dash cam on waste trucks. So we were turning these waste collection trucks into data collection trucks. So using existing municipal fleets to capture data around traffic volumes, to capture data around safety as well and the condition of roads. And I think all those items fall into some of this infrastructure planning around smart mobility. And if we can capture that data, utilizing AI technology, reducing our costs in terms of data collection, it's going to really improve some of the city planning processes, as well as some of the data models we build around mobility. So I think, the Internet of Things, data in the cloud is very important in regards to some of the decisions we make around planning, curbside planning, where are certain assets going to be located, the monitoring and the condition assessments of these assets. So I think it's crucial that we enable some of these IoT devices where there's a lot of sensors involved for that consistent data collection and monitoring.
Understanding the data to optimize our traffic and mobility solutions is going to be key going forward. We just can't do it without that information and data.
When we talk about arts and technology, one of the things that come to mind is that when do we involve the artists in technology? And I think it is important to consider that when we make these hubs for mobility, for example, we are looking at these hubs and there's an opening of this hub, let's say, and we go in and we say, we need some art pieces here. And I'm just thinking that is one definition of how we can involve arts. It's a shallow definition though. We want to involve the artists early on in the process, very early on, because it's the artists that are going to think about how the user experience is going to look like. And that would define the technology or the smart mobility. So that is one thing that I really want to focus on when it comes to arts and technology. Let's look at our artists around here in Hamilton and the greater area, and let's involve them, number one, early on in the process, pre-groundbreaking, pre-thinking processes. And second, let us have our artists challenge the technology. Let them imagine how our smart system, our smart mobility systems are going to look like. And from that challenge, the technology folks can give the artists an experience to live in. Because a few hours ago, we heard that we want to build a community that is conducive to our artists. And I think we do see art in our spaces, but how about we flip it around and make the artists feel that the spaces are within their art?
One of the priorities is definitely safety in regards to smart mobility. I'll use an example of sidewalks. The city of Hamilton gets a lot of claims against them with people tripping over sidewalks, injuries, raised Marlboro slabs, joint cracks, different types of cracks. And in regards to sort of that data collection, we've been using technology, for example, installing a camera on a golf cart that just drives around the city and picks up all these different defects proactively on sidewalks to prevent injuries, to prevent liabilities for the city.
One of the groups that we need to make sure that we're keeping front and center as we're planning our future state, which we'll talk about shortly, is always through the lens of accessibility. We are, obligated by law to meet certain minimum standards. But the problem with minimum standards is it's the floor, it's not the ceiling. And sometimes as we're designing public infrastructure and designing routing, we're doing we're doing the best we can with the resources that we have available, but we're not really factoring in the user experience and how true accessibility and multimodality could really look for the residents of Hamilton.
When we think about smart mobility, we think about autonomous vehicles and we think about Tesla. And right now, Tesla is for the wealthy. And if we delink status from our cars, we redefine what our cars are for. And through that, we can enable much more better scenarios of smarter mobilities.
Earlier design session today had used the word eco-guilt, and I'm like, guilty. I get into my car, I have a transit stop 500 meters from my house, I could easily get into transit. By compromise, I bought an e-scooter And I can't wait for the weather to get better so I can get on my e-scooter and ride to work, because not only do I not sit in my car, I feel like I'm contributing sort of to the environment. Hopefully I don't, from a safety perspective, I do worry about that, but I have a nice orange vest on and I look like a geek, but it works for me. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, and all these different methods of things that we need to focus on going forward. Let's put the practical aside and say, okay, cast your eye forward. Where do you see, technology and art supporting the future of smart mobility infrastructure? And go crazy with your imagination. Lay out that vision for us as far in the future as you want, because I think those types of ideas end up appearing sooner than we think.
Battery electric buses is on everyone's lips, and it's a hot topic. It's a remarkably expensive infrastructure. Not only are the vehicle prices exponentially more than sort of your traditional vehicles, but the supporting infrastructure that a municipality requires, on-street chargers or retrofits to existing transit facilities, we're talking multi-million dollar projects and multi-year to get there and to build out. And battery electric buses in the Canadian context are still a relatively unproven technology. So I think that will change over the course of the next decade. I think there's transit agencies in the GTA that are moving forward very quickly on testing out some of that technology. I'm curious to see kind of what results that it yields for them. But I think for us in Hamilton, we have a CNG fleet, which is greener than a traditional diesel bus. We're more than 70% in that sphere right now. So when I look at electrification, for me, I'm happy to sort of sit back and let some of my peers go first, because when Hamilton goes in to BEBs, I would like the municipality to tackle it holistically. So we're building charging infrastructure that supports transit, fire, police, EMS, paramedic, other agencies as well, instead of replicating infrastructure for multiple silos in the city.
Let's think about a time when we are stressed out and we take a smart transit. The smart transit recognizes that we are stressed out, knows our history, plays a soothing music for us. And so we experience that. It makes our mood better. It de-stresses us. Today, if we are driving a car, we can't text and talk on the phone. Or at least not text, because that's against the law. But maybe 5 years, 10 years down the road, your boss could ask you, why didn't you text while driving? Because you're driving in a smart car. So how would the experience look like? And that's where I think the arts can play a great role.
When I look at sort of the future of technology and arts, I think about how technology can break down silos between multiple departments. I'll give you an example. Graffiti across the city. There's certain areas where graffiti is allowed, and then there's certain areas where graffiti isn't allowed. And if we're able to sort of, build places where, citizens can go ahead and display this art, whether it's along a transit corridor or whether it's along, some of the on-demand, transit hubs, it's going to draw attention for a lot of the younger generation that are going to feel more comfortable being there. You're not in a massive infrastructure with just, steel beams and gray walls and bricks. So I think that's where, art and technology kind of mixes together. Sort of to what someone said, is providing that comfort level as well.
Other areas that I see of interest that people are talking about is like air mobility corridors. This idea of, will Swiss Chalet have a drone and you order something and it picks up your order and it's got a parachute, so in case the battery dies, it'll slowly come to the ground and it just goes in a straight line to your house. Or is Shoppers Drug Mart going to be dropping off my pharmacy prescription on my front porch with a drone? Those things, maybe, robotics, delivery vehicles. We saw, if you were following what happened in Toronto, there was a company in Toronto that was doing sidewalk-based delivery. Does that have an environmental footprint where we say that makes more sense than having someone in a full-size vehicle. We see things around, I think it's New York and a couple areas are doing e-cargo bikes as a real case where, that last mile delivery, it doesn't make sense to drive, whether it's an EV vehicle or internal combustion engine, you take it to a central location and then you're using e-bikes to deliver for that last mile delivery. Will we get to that utopia of, maybe nobody needs a car? I definitely know we talk about accessibility and safety. My mother is visually impaired. For her to get a ride and be able to get into a vehicle in some form of independence where she could speak to Alexa effectively and say, Alexa, bring me a ride that I can go to the grocery store and be able to get into that vehicle, and it's designed to be accessible for people with physical or disability challenges. That's a great vision, and I hope we get there sooner rather than later.
Coming in 2023, we will be debuting for public consultation our newly designed network. The existing bus network as it stands right now has been in place for about 100 years, so arguably time for a refresh, and we really have focused on hub-based model as opposed to a traditional everything heads into sort of the downtown core. We've looked at the major economic drivers like the airport district, Stony Creek, different areas and major destinations. And part and parcel of that, like the nitty-gritty level, will be stop placement through the lens of Vision Zero and complete street modeling to make it even more accessible for our users.
Mark John Stewart, before our panel here, mentioned that there are a number of social plagues in our society that is affecting our social fabric. This thought of associating status with cars is one such plague. Perhaps design thinking that Robert Fleischig talked about this morning can help. And design thinking by artists to portray an artist rendering of how a public transit can be perceived would help.
We never used to talk about a bus stop as a public place, as public space, as part of the realm and the street experience for mothers with strollers, with kids, for people using mobility devices, for people trying to put their bike on the front of the bike rack. And that's one of the big shifts in the industry that has happened, I would say, predominantly in the last decade. So as we look forward to the new network and as we look forward as a city to bringing our LRT online, the discussions about how do we make this an exciting, welcoming, accessible public space are starting to happen very much at the early level, but it's really encouraging to see that that's something that staff at the City of Hamilton are turning their mind to in the early phases.
As an artist, a visual artist that successfully competed in the City of Hamilton public art process, some of my artwork is on the signal boxes throughout the city. Is that something maybe that transit would consider, looking at the arts community to provide artworks that could be put up on your bus shelters or on your buses so that it's a partnership within the community and it gives a more pleasing look to the equipment that you're using rather than having an ad, big poster sign stuck on the side of the bus shelter. Or in the buses too, because you go on the bus and there are always the same old ads all the time, and it'd be nice to see some artwork up there.
Interesting to have poetry on buses, on the tubes in the UK, where people could have local artists that had written things, and they added that as part of it. But Maureen, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Sorry, it seems to be your area.
So we have a customer experience and innovation team, and public art in transit spaces is something that is on the short-term horizon for us. When we travel to other systems, particularly like if you use the MTA in New York City, they have examples. We do have contractual ad space obligations, but they're not all used all the time. Art in the stations, on board the vehicles, to create a more community-focused and a great way for local artists really to showcase their talents.
Taking a lane out one of the mountain escarpment pathway, I couldn't go up that before with my e-scooter if the Keddy Access Trail didn't exist. They've recently had artist installations where they put artwork along the inside barrier of the Keddy access trail. I know from an LRT perspective, there's that whole, how do we turn it into an evolution of the corridor through the city itself? And obviously there's many challenges because you're dealing with different levels of government, you're dealing with like an operating specification that may have been written 10 years ago and things like that. But to Maureen's point, I think the thought processes, I see them coming up internally. I just found out the other day, I think it's our Terry Cook bus terminal, for example. I believe it has eco-green roofs on all of the, so for bee sort of population and other wildlife, all the tops of those transit terminals are green spaces, and I didn't even know that, and I'm from the city.
It's always the pull for the municipal dollars at budget time, right? And our council and the other levels of government have given transit $500 million to build out our network, to get a new second garage in the lower city, to put in a new AVL for improved safety for employees and passengers. There's a suite of projects under that we'll be delivering in the next 8 to 10 years. And that's aside from the LRT. So there has been significant investment in the transit network in the city of Hamilton. We have our rapid corridor network, the BLAST network design, and ultimately the new network redesign is all supportive of feeding the LRT train, and it's part and parcel of creating a transit environment that influences people to choose transit as their first choice. There is a stigma with taking transit. You can't afford a car, you have to take the bus. We are doing what we can to break down those barriers. I'm just gonna ask show of hands, who has a bus pass? Wow. Who knows that right now you can buy a Presto e-ticket that will allow you to travel unlimited for 72 hours for $15? Okay, like that's the deal of, that's a phenomenal deal. So we're doing things like that to try to encourage people to try our service. And to make our service successful, it has to be reliable and it has to be frequent. 10-minute headway is about the trick where people won't bother looking at schedules anymore. They'll just feel confident that if they stand at a stop, next bus will come along. So those are the types of things that we're building towards over time. And when budget season comes, make sure you let your local councillor know that you view transit as a priority for a vibrant Hamilton.